Hello and welcome. I'm Brian Hall. Thank you for joining me for the virtual book launch of Tiger Men, an Australian Soldier's Secret War in Vietnam by the late Lieutenant Colonel Barry Petersen. I'm very pleased to present this, the fifth publication of Tiger Men, because I met and knew Barry Petersen for 25 years until he died in 2019, aged 84. This year, 2025, is not only the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, the end of the Vietnam War, but significantly for Barry Petersen's story, it is now 60 years since he was forced by his own bosses, the CIA, the South Vietnamese Army, and ultimately the Australian Army, to leave the Central Highlands under threat of his own elimination. This is the first time that Tiger Men is available as an e-book, as well as print on demand, which you can order from the link on this Facebook page and on the website tigermen.com.au. The original book covers Captain Barry Petersen's time in the AATTV, the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam, on a covert mission that he was solely and uniquely chosen to do in the Central Highlands of Vietnam between 1963 to 65. His CIA-funded recruitment, training and fighting alongside the Montagnard Hill tribe peoples for 2 years against the Viet Cong forces heading south on the Ho Chi Minh Trail is the subject of his autobiography Tiger Men, which was originally published in 1988. In 2019, a short documentary was made based essentially on the first chapter of Tiger Men called A Taste of the Depths. This was about the Australian Defence Force training regimes held at their base at Middle Head on Sydney Harbour, and in particular the Code of Conduct course, known unofficially as the School of Torture. Here now is that film, A Taste of the Depths, to give you a taste of what else is to come in this new edition of Tiger Men.
Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War began officially in 1962. Our first soldiers were highly skilled, highly secretive members of a special operations team, and they were there to help train South Vietnam's allies. This film, is about one member of that team, whom I met, back in the late 1970s. And his book, Tiger Men, is a fascinating story of jungle warfare and intrigue and treachery, and of spies. Captain Barry Petersen, if you like, was Australia's sort of Colonel Kurt's Lawrence of Arabia. And his story you're about to hear is highly personal, begins against the beautiful backdrop of Sydney Harbour.
My name is Barry Petersen. I was born in a small town halfway up the coastline of Queensland. I was called up for national service, which in those days was 3 months. I enjoyed that, so I decided to join the Army. I was selected and attended the Officer Cadet School, graduating in 1954. I was then posted to the 1st Battalion in the Royal Australian Regiment. In Malaya, I was commanding a platoon. We were operating against the communist terrorists along the south of the Thai border. We spent 2 years doing that. I was selected then to be one of the first advisors to go to Vietnam. The American CIA were already conducting programs with the mountain tribes and other minority groups, and it was fairly obvious that they wanted people like myself with my training to undertake work with the Montagnard in Daklak province in the Central Highlands. They were far more advanced than the Orang Asli in Malaysia.
You'd been in Malaya, you'd been in the Australian Army there, you'd done the counterinsurgency, but still before you headed off to Vietnam you had to go through a torture course in Sydney.
Well, I had to go through a special operations course, and I did this Code of Conduct course. We call it a Code of Conduct
Code of
course.
Conduct.
That's
yeah,
right.
The newspapers called it a torture course, didn't they?
School of Torture, that's right.
Okay.
It was very, very valuable training. The people who attended the course
were volunteers and could pull out at any stage. But you were treated as a prisoner, you were interrogated. It gave you a feeling of what it was like, what it would be like, to a degree, a very minor degree, if you were captured and interrogated. And
it was 12 days in a dungeon, basically, wasn't it? 12 or 14?
I really don't know how many days it was. In fact, you lose total control of time. You don't know what time of the day it is, what time of the day or night. They try to disorient you totally.
Isolation, dungeons,
Yes.
water
Yes.
torture, goodness knows what else.
Yes.
It was sponsored by the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, highly classified at that time, to prepare people like myself for special operations with foreign forces offshore. There were 5 of us selected initially, but by the time we got together, there were 30, a mixture of captains, lieutenants, and warrant officers. It involved being trained at the then School of Military Intelligence, which was located in Middle Head. Our briefings took place there. Not many people knew in those days of Vietnam, even the people lecturing to us. It was evident that when we got to Vietnam, some of us were going to be posted to isolated positions, and it was a bit of a worry in case we were captured. The best thing we could do at that stage was try to train our advisors, as we were called, let them know what it's like to be a prisoner under interrogation. It was rather unusual. We turned up the following morning in decent clothing for an introduction, and then suddenly all these guys in uniforms with Mao caps, khaki Mao caps on with red stars, burst through the doors and the windows, and we were held at gunpoint. Then we were herded over towards an area where we had to take our clothes off, and were issued with an old World War type uniform, baggy. Well, the pants were baggy and the jacket was too small. And they deliberately did that because you had no way to hold your pants up, and you couldn't keep yourself warm all over your body because you were wearing too small a jacket. Anyhow, we were then blindfolded and taken into the gun emplacements. Now, these are the gun emplacements you're looking at. And because we were blindfolded, we didn't know what they looked like at that stage. All we could do was get this musky smell and dampness. So we were led everywhere. When we were moved around from cell to cell, we were blindfolded. Now, the thing is that when we got to a place where, it was perfectly safe to walk upright, they'd say, you've got to bend down here, and you'll have to crawl there, and then you'd be doing that, not realising whether they were telling the truth or otherwise. Now, this is what later was called the School of Torture. Now, it involved being subjecting you to continuous noise, continuous communist music, communist propaganda. Because in those days, the communists were the bogeymen of the Western world. There were various cells. I gave them names. One I called the screaming cell because there was nothing but this shrill whistle all the time. Once I was in there and the blindfold was taken off, I couldn't speak to anyone. I could hardly think because of this piercing whistle. Another one was obviously adjacent to another prisoner where we could talk to each other quietly through the walls. And I think this was designed to gain information from us because military personnel, when they're taken prisoner, are only permitted to give their army number, their army rank, and their name, nothing else. Mine was 13668, Barry Petersen, Army. And that was it. So you had to be very wary of what you were asked or what you said. On one occasion when I was in an adjacent cell, the young guy on the other side asked to be removed from the course. He just couldn't hack it. In 1985, I was asked to write my autobiography. The name of the book is Tigermen. I'll just read a few excerpts from Tiger Men on my imprisonment and interrogation in the dungeons of Middle Head. It was a small room, dank and stinking and quite evil. There were no windows, but bright light totally surrounded me, shining fierce and penetrating like a desert sun. Normally the room would be cold, but the lights purged all chill and burned a path deep into the soul. There would have been 3, maybe 4 interrogators in the room. It was never easy to tell, for they stood behind the lights. There were shadows with harsh voices and batons that prodded and punched and hurt. A broomstick lay flat on the floor, and I was kneeling on it. How simple the means of torture. The broomstick, nestling just below both kneecaps, had become a living thing, the carnivore gnawing at my joints and threatening to devour my whole body. I knelt emotionless, back straight, both arms stretched out like some demented amputee, perched ready to dive from the highest tower. The questions were about to begin. Name? Petersen. Rank? Captain. Number? 13668. Unit? 13668. Captain Arthur Barry Petersen. Today, Petersen, you'll tell us more. The others have told us, a second voice said. The others have told us, Petersen. I said nothing. My knees were on fire, and the pain was as though bayonets were thrusting up my thighs. But my back was still straight, my arms steadfastly thrust forward. And most importantly, my mouth was shut. Number, rank, and name was the only safe communication with the world. It was dangerous to say more, folly even to seek refuge in a lie. Just one hint of information and their wedge could find a hold. Then it would be driven in bit by bit until a crack became a crevasse and all the world would be lost. I had committed a crime, not yet discovered. I had contrived to steal a wire from the disused light fitting, was just enough to encircle my waist, and thus to experience the joy of walking with my trousers up. With the waistband of the trousers rolled over the wire belt, the crime was concealed. On this day, kneeling on the broomstick with my trousers held in place, I had at least a vestige of dignity. But the pain in the knees and thighs was becoming intolerable, and my hands were beginning to drop. Get them up! A baton jabbed into my back, just above the kidneys. My body jolted upright, and the arms went out again, ramrod straight. Yet movement was enough to loosen my trousers, so illicitly held. He's got wire, the second interrogator said. I looked down and saw that the waistband of the trousers had slipped and the wire was exposed. The first interrogator was calling, Get it off him! Get it off him! Hands were grabbing at my waist, and the frail wire toggle I had so carefully contrived when I first obtained this treasure broke apart. The trousers slumped to my knees, and I was kneeling, bare-bummed. Where did you get the wire? I said nothing. You've been vandalizing this prison, Petersen. I wanted to say something, to tell them how desperately I needed to hold up my trousers, so that I could move with dignity. I wanted to explain and obtain understanding and forgiveness, but then too I was suspicious, obstinate. I said nothing. The first interrogator spoke to me more quietly then. Why do you do it, Petersen? He said. Why do you keep leaving yourself open to punishment? The others are far more sensible. The others, I hardly knew them. I had caught glimpses of some of them, dressed like me, shuffling about this strange place. Occasionally I heard their voices in the various interrogation rooms, but they remained anonymous. I was losing all sense of time. There was no night or day, no measure of the hours, nor any clear routine to give life an intelligible pattern. I was in a constant state of apprehension about unpleasant experiences. It was almost a relief to find I had something concrete to do. I was to see the counsellor. He was in an office I had not previously seen. It was a clean and relatively warm place, where there was a chair for me to sit, and a desk behind which sat the counsellor, an affable man in his mid-30s. Sit down, Petersen, he said, quite brightly. Thank you. Cigarette? I did not smoke. Even if I had, I would not have taken it. It might have compromised me. No, thank you. Well, he said, how about a cup of coffee? I would have loved a cup of coffee. I would have given an arm for a cup of coffee. No, thank you. He looked a little troubled. You can have water if you like. I could have water. I did not feel I would be compromised by accepting water. Yes, please. The council looked pleased. There was a guard who got a tin mug of water while the councillor studied a little piece of paper before him. Now, he said, as I drank the water, and he eyed the paper, Arthur Barry Petersen, a captain. What do I call you, Arthur or Barry? I do not like the name Arthur, never have. I've always been known as Barry. But beware the wedge. Captain Petersen will do, I said. Come on now, it's not necessary to be that formal, he said, and he was laughing a little. I said nothing. Well, let's start somewhere else, he said. Can I ask you how you're feeling? I'm well, thank you. The cold worry you? I said nothing. He was smiling at me, almost as though I were a child, frightened of the bogeyman. I'm only asking you because I know how miserable this place can be, he said. All right for us cold-blooded southerners, but no place for a Queenslander. I said nothing. I must have blinked, for he had startled me. How did he know I was a Queenslander? The councillor was watching me. He said, Petersen, there's no need to be so sensitive. I'm not asking you for no information. I shut the door. The response was rapid fire. 13668, Captain A.B. Petersen. I'll leave you to the others, Captain, he said. I was taken to the music room to squat on the damp floor and think about Queensland. Such a small thing, yet so important. I searched every corner of my memory to try and remember for a moment when I might have slipped. I could think of nothing. I slept even worse than usual that night. We weren't aware of how long we'd been in those cells because we never knew whether it was day or night. They would bring a meal to you, this sloppy rice, and then they would neglect to feed you for another 10 or 12 hours. You'd say, well, you know, where's my last meal? And they'd say, oh, you just had it a couple of hours ago. Then they'd give you the next meal after about 15 minutes. They'd try to totally confuse you. There was one particular cell I should mention. You had to be lowered down into it. It had water in the bottom, only about ankle deep, and it had some bricks and a plank. And there was nowhere to sit down, so you could either sit on the plank or lie on it if you were careful, and have the plank resting on bricks. There were rats in there, so you could hear the rats swimming around and occasionally trying to get onto you. No, that wasn't a very pleasant experience. I must have been closer to giving in than I realised. Soon I was moved from the music room to the whistle stop. Although the routine was never really predictable, there was a pattern to this. The sessions in the conversation suite, the bad sessions, were generally prefaced by time in the whistle top. The awful shrieking tore at the nerves in just the right manner to soften candidates for interrogation and perhaps revelation. I sat in the bunk and waited for the call. The shrieking tuned the nerves so tightly it was as though they were about to snap like overstretched piano wires. I wanted the interrogation. I prepared for it in my mind, and in my every response prepared. If they'd talked about Queensland, I would be totally mute. If they would get nothing from me, no matter what the pressure of the discomfort, I was ready. But nobody came. I waited and waited. Nothing happened. The shrieking was turned off. There was silence. Then my whole body was shaking, out of control. I was drenched with sweat as though overtaken by a profound fever. I was Pavlov's dog. I'd been salivating for the test, but it had not come. Then, at the lowest moment, I saw the answer to the councillor's information about Queensland. Regimental number 13668, Captain Arthur Barry Petersen. That was it, the number. It was prefaced by the number 1, and the 1 signified Queensland, and so indicated the point of recruitment and possibly birth. I'd been broadcasting my origin 10 or 12 times a day, and had been too stupid or confused to realise it. I had not slipped up. I had not revealed a secret. Soon after, perhaps it was just as well, I was taken from my cell, hooded. Then for the first time since we were captured, I found myself among fellow prisoners, or at least it seemed so. I could hear guards shouting orders at others, apparently in a similar condition to me. We were prodded, shoved and pushed around until we were jostling one another like blind sheep. The guards were evidently trying to herd us in some sort of formation. Suddenly my hood was ripped off. It was a stunning moment. We stood around a table laden with food. "It's all over," the guards said. "You're through." It's another one of their tricks, I thought. Be careful. I looked at my fellow prisoners. All but one had survived the tests. I learned a lesson. I learned about myself. I'm grateful for the assurance it gave me that I could at least summon the strength and capacity to resist such a trial. Soon after, I was flying to South Vietnam. This was 1963. I knew little about that country and that war. Neither did most people in the world outside.
So, as you can see, Lieutenant Colonel Barry Petersen left a lasting legacy in both military and later civilian circles. He was highly regarded as not only a great soldier, but as a dedicated businessman in later life when he moved to live in Bangkok, Thailand. Following now are testimonials from several notable military and media people on how Barry Petersen, the man whom the CIA dubbed Lawrence of the Highlands, can best be remembered.
Should put a bloody big plaque up for him somewhere, or his statue, in his Riot Aid dress. He done a bloody beautiful job.
He was an honest, straightforward, hard-working officer. I have the highest regard for him, and I still regard him as a personal friend, and that's after 50 years.
I think he should be remembered by Australians very much the way he was remembered then by the Montagnard, as a hero and a true leader and a maverick and a remarkable person.
Barry Petersen became viscerally involved with the Montagnard people, but he knew when to draw the line. He was always a soldier. He was always leading soldiers, and he stopped at any orders which required him to train assassins or death squads. He was not training a death squad. He was leading soldiers in combat, and he did so extremely bravely and with great courage and with great sympathy for the people under his command. And I think he should be remembered for that.
I've heard rumours myself that I've even seen the computer a couple of times where certain people there went feral, and but I can assure you and everybody that Barry Petersen didn't go feral. Just by joining the people to achieve our goal doesn't mean to say he went feral. And I think he used a lot of intelligence in by doing what he did. You know, he is a very intelligent man. And by creating that idea that being one of them, I can't see why people even use the word feral. And as far as him saying to the Montagnards that they were going to have autonomy, no, I can't accept that, because Barry didn't do that. He didn't promise the Montagnards autonomy. I mean, not all the time I was with him, and I couldn't imagine him, and I've known him for many years, I couldn't imagine him ever losing sight of his aims and his goals, never. When you have a goal, especially in a situation like that, to achieve that goal, you may have to do things you might like doing and that type of thing, but that's not losing sight of your goal, is it? I mean, let's face it, if you're going to achieve your goal, well then sometimes it may be necessary to do something that you shouldn't do, but as long as you achieve that goal.
There's part of the Australian character. I've met them all around the world. You suddenly go into the jungles of Borneo, or you go into Alaska, or you go into the back blocks of China, and you come across some Australian and you say, what the hell are you doing here? That's what Barry's like. What the hell was Barry doing in Montagnard country? Well, he was up there being an Aussie. He was up there actually having a go. He was up there risking it, and the adrenaline flow. I think that's what it's about. That so often they do push the envelope. And he's one of those blokes who pushed the envelope. He was a soldier, but he was more than that. He was out there. He was a larrikin. He was an adventurer. He was a privateer almost.
As a story, it's a remarkable story of a bloke who tried to do the right thing, and he was an Australian who fought a very dishonourable war in an honourable way.
In my 10 years in America, in Washington, New York, I did a lot of stories about the CIA. And you suddenly realise it's more than just a clandestine operation. That in fact there's wheels within wheels and layers within layers. That whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's in Vietnam, the CIA operatives were given a licence not just to kill, but a licence to almost do what they liked, and they had the money to do it. So it's not surprising to hear that some of the CIA wanted to eliminate Barry. Even though he was working for the CIA, and others in the French intelligence, and others in even the Australian intelligence, I'm sure that he was a rogue elephant up in those mountains. So it's not simply the secretary or the minister or the head of the CIA running things. It's the bloke on the ground, the operative on the ground, as we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan and in Africa, in other parts of the world. So you tend to think it's orderly, and you tend to think it's well organised, and you tend to think that they're acting according to some rule book. But they're not. The CIA, when they're on the ground, can almost do what they like. They've got the money and the power and the arrogance to do it. So as disturbing as it was for Barry to find that there were some CIA operatives who wanted to kill him, I'm not surprised. I think that's part of this spy versus spy game they play. It's a deadly game.
He had terrific officer qualities, but I mean, none of us knew where we were going to go or where we were going to end up. But he had those natural qualities of leadership, of a calm demeanour, of being able to train people very well. Obviously brave. He was a Military Cross winner and mentioned in dispatches. So he had the hallmarks of doing big things. But I think his real forte was in dealing with native people, if I can put it that way, which is a hard job to do. Training your own people in your own circumstances is pretty easy compared with trying to train people from another country and tribal people at that, where you've got language difficulties, trust difficulties, and all the other inhibitions that those circumstances sometimes thrust upon you.
Barry Petersen will be remembered as an Australian businessman who came here in the early 90s, a bit path-breaking, a bit trailblazing. I remember Bangkok in the early 90s was still, it wasn't the Bangkok of today. It was still developing, business was still maturing. And so it was a fairly, probably brave decision to be an Australian businessman coming to Bangkok in the early 90s and setting up a new business and getting yourself established. And so Barry was one of those trailblazers. There were 3 or 4 of them, I think, who really brought Australian business to Thailand, and they succeeded because they understood how to do business in Thailand. They succeeded because they knew how to work with Thais in business. And they've been recognised because now the Australian Chamber of Commerce, the Australian Thai Chamber of Commerce, is regarded as being one of the best, if not the best, chambers of commerce here in Bangkok. And that's because of the path-breaking work that people like Barry did.
Barry Petersen received the first ever President's Award from Auscham
in recognition of the great work he's done for them over the years, in addition to all the other work that he does, advising them in all the different matters that might come up, and he's the man with so many answers. They gave him this award to thank him for doing so much for Auscham and for Australians living in this part of the world.
Barry Petersen, the soldier, how would you like him to be remembered?
As a good soldier, for a start. That one who was out of the box, and one who could develop empathy with not only fellow Australians but with foreigners. I had no trouble, for example, fitting in with the Vietnamese, with the Montagnard in Vietnam, nor the Vietnamese, and in Thailand here, no trouble at all fitting in with the Thais. And I think that if I can go down in history as being remembered as a soldier, I'd like to be remembered as one who is an example for future young soldiers. And in fact, I was approached by the Australian Defence College in Canberra to ask if I would be a silent mentor. And my name was given to one of the cadets, who then had to research me and my past and produce an article on me. And it's on the internet. He spelt my name incorrectly, but that's beside the point. And it sounds rather like a recruiting effort on his part. But obviously I'm well known in the Australian Army because of my experience, and really my experience was the luck of the draw. I just happened to be the one at the right time, right place, and did the right things, I think, as far as some of the hierarchy are concerned.
So Barry Petersen was still somewhat humble in terms of his own achievements during the Vietnam War. Some reasons why the re-release of Tigerman is significant in today's world, which are expanded on in the new edition, are several of Barry's military tactics and practices were permanently adapted by the Australian Army for following battles and are still in use today. Other considerations are Indigenous partnerships in war, the ethics of covert programs, small nation soldiers in great power contests, cultural survival and the human cost, leadership under ambiguity, information and myth-making, a case study in ally protection and failure, Australian military heritage freshly told, and 2025's reflection window of the 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, which now looks at less US-centric accounts as well as Indigenous perspectives. Importantly too, there are angles for the younger generation of students, emerging professionals, Gen Z and now Gen Alpha. The School of Torture film was used as an education tool for senior history classes for high school students, shown in situ at Middle Head in the dungeons and ramparts of the old military training grounds. These new angles of significance for younger readers are also expanded in the extra material of Tigermen. A reminder now to simply click on the link on this Facebook page or on the website tigermen.com.au to order your ebook or print-on-demand copy of Tigermen, an Australian Soldier's Secret War in Vietnam. Thank you for your time in joining me today, and I trust you'll enjoy reading this new edition of a great story by one of Australia's most notable soldiers.